Hear ye, hear ye. All persons having business before this court are admonished to draw nigh and give their attention to the court now sitting.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good afternoon and welcome to the Supreme Court of Kansas. I note that we have a number of distinguished guests with us today. I'll do my best to acknowledge all of you. If I do not call upon you, it's not because you're not worthy. It's because I simply have forgotten that you are here. In no particular order, so pay no heed to what the order is. The Honorable Sam Crow, United States District Court Judge for the District of Kansas. We have 6 Court of Appeals judges. I'll acknowledge Chief Judge Tom Malone and his five of his colleagues. We have, by last count, 26 Washburn professors. My question is, who's watching the law students? We have the president of Washburn University, Dr. Farley. We have the dean of the Washburn Law School, Dean Romick. We have 17 employees of the court who are graduates of Washburn Law School, and they are seated in a special section which is labeled the Concannon Legacy section. And before we start, I want to remind you that we are broadcasting live over the internet, and the camera sometimes sweeps the courtroom, so you might want to be on your best behavior. I also want to give a little background about the Justice Awards. In 1987, a national foundation presented the court with its Outstanding Achievement Award for significant contributions to the improvement of justice. And the award consisted of a gold medallion, which is exhibited in a display case on the east side of the 3rd floor of the Fotzer courtroom in this building, and a check for $10,000. The award money, which has been designated by the court for recognition of those who have been instrumental in the improvement of justice in Kansas, has been invested, and with the earnings, the court has established the Kansas Supreme Court Justice Awards program. The purpose of the program is to recognize persons or organizations which have contributed significantly to the improvement of justice in the state of Kansas, and any Kansan or Kansas organization, except members of the Supreme Court and their personal staff, darn it, is eligible for the award. Recipients of the award are given a cash award and a certificate in the form of a plaque memorializing the award. Also, a permanent plaque listing the names of the recipients is on public display in this building just outside this courtroom near the elevators. Mr. Kenneth C. Bronson was the first recipient of the award in 1989. The most recent recipient was Mr. Gerald Goodell, who is with us today. And the court has not chosen to make the award annually, but rather as warranted by achievement. At this time, it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Concannon and his family. He's accompanied by his wife, Melissa Masoner, his son and daughter-in-law, Chris and Michelle Masoner, grandchildren, James, Paul, and Maggie Masoner, and his wife's brother and sister-in-law, Bill and Diana Porter. 2 of Professor Concannon's longtime colleagues will present Professor Concannon. I will first call upon David Heineman, and I told him this morning when I called him that I wanted him to limit his remarks to 90 minutes.
Oh, if I knew I had that much time. Chief Justice Nuss, Honorable Justices, members of the judiciary, and the family and many friends of Jim Concannon. May it please the court. I'm indeed very pleased and honored to have been asked by Jim Concannon, my best friend for over 50 years, the best man at my wedding, and my daughter Suzanne Steiner's godfather, to play a small role in this court's presentation to him of the Kansas Supreme Court Justice Award, an award that stands out above all others, as the Chief just said, because it is rarely given, and then only to a highly deserving person. Jim and I first started our acquaintance as farm kids near Garden City, Kansas. Jim's boyhood home was located on his great-grandfather James Concannon's original 1884 homestead located in Garfield County, which was Kansas' 106th county, before this court ruled in 1892 that it didn't meet the size requirements to be a county. So forever putting it on as the panhandle of Finney County. Interestingly, the homestead is now the site of the Concannon Lake off of Highway 156 east of Garden City, where only a windmill tower still remains. Jim was born on October 2nd, 1947, at Columbus, Georgia, which seems strange until it is explained that his parents, James and Mary Jane Concannon, were living near Fort Benning, his father's last duty station when he completed his World War II service. After his family returned to Garden City, or Finney County, his father worked for the USDA and served as a trustee for the Garden City Community College. His mother became a key staffer for the Finney County Welfare Office. Most do not know that his mother, the youngest of 5, lost the last of her parents when her oldest sister was only 14, and that she and her siblings continued to reside at their family home and raise themselves without the assistance of any governmental agency, with only a neighbor providing some oversight. It's easy to see why Jim may have picked up some of the traits and qualities we admire and respect in him today: self-reliance and a commitment to help others, particularly those less fortunate. Needless to say, Jim, who was his high school class's youngest member, having skipped a year in grade school, excelled and was his class salutatorian. He also was very active in DeMolay, serving as the state master counselor, and in 1966, his hard work and dedication earned him recognition as the International DeMolay of the Year. No small feat. In 1967, Jim and I roomed together at the University of Kansas. I was in graduate school and Jim was completing his senior year, having been recognized as a Summerfield Scholar the previous year. One evening, as we quaffed a few beverages at the Wheel, a local KU hangout, having noted that the state representative from Garden City was not running for re-election, we got into a lengthy discussion about how 2 young kids could get involved in that race and actually try to make a difference. A few weeks later, after gathering up the courage, I drove to Topeka with my friend Robert Velser, a member of the Kansas House, and filed for the seat. My next step was to call Jim, who was back in Garden City, to announce that he was now a campaign manager. It was then I went into a state of total shock as Jim informed me that the local Republican Party, who I'd bothered not to contact, had sent a name to the Secretary of State's office, and I was not unopposed in the primary as previously thought. In spite of this setback, Jim, with his organizational skills and the help of many friends, orchestrated a campaign the likes of which Garden City had never seen before, and we prevailed over a well-known businessman in the primary and the school board president in the general election. Well, it's easy to see that Jim's electioneering skills were noticed, sought, and soon used by others, including John Peterson when he ran for Congress, and Jack Breyer on many of his statewide campaigns for Secretary of State. Later, when Jim interviewed with the Washburn Board of Regents for the position of Dean of the Washburn Law School, it was explained to him that it was very critical that the new dean be able to raise significant funds for the expansion of the law library. Well, Jim quickly responded that after having had much experience asking for money for various political candidates, it would be easy for him to now ask for money for a real good cause. Needless to say, the library addition was soon built as a result of the new dean's fundraising skills. At the end of my first year in the legislature, at the urging of Jim and many of my colleagues, I entered Washburn Law School, where I became close friends with Ray Spring, who taught my criminal law and criminal procedure classes. These were made much more interesting because Ray had been instrumental in helping to draft the recodifications of both as they wound their way through the legislative processes. Later, after Ray became dean, he complained to me that he was at his wit's end trying to find someone to teach conflicts during the summer term. I quickly informed him that I had a close friend, currently serving as Justice Alex Frommy's research attorney, who would make an excellent person for him to contact. Dean Spring called Jim that very afternoon, and sight unseen, Jim was hired. Jim had originally intended to be an assistant county attorney working for Ed Collister, but that fell through when Ed lost the election. Jim, who had now found his real life's calling to be that of a teacher, quickly accepted Dean Spring's next invitation to become a full-time law professor at Washburn Law School. In 1971, Jim and I had driven to Denver to visit some old high school friends. It was a beautiful Saturday morning as we headed back to Kansas on I-70. We were in my convertible, the top down, 8-track playing some Simon and Garfunkel. Suddenly, Jim announced that life just doesn't get any better than this, and that he was enjoying this morning a lot more than his friends back in Lawrence. I quizzed him as to, "What do you mean by this?" To which he replied that at that very instant, his KU Law School class, of which he ranked second, was in the midst of its graduation ceremony. Jim now admits that he has more than paid his penance for missing his own graduation, in that he has had to attend more than 40 of them. Today, Jim is known by all practitioners to be Kansas' preeminent legal scholar and authority in his specialty areas of evidence, civil procedure, and appellate practice. He's authored countless books, chapters, law journal articles in those specialty areas. And for decades, Jim has been good enough to share his expertise through his presentations at legal education seminars, bar reviews, as well as providing key testimony before state legislative committees. Since 1998, Jim has served as a Kansas commissioner on the National Conference of Commissioners on State Laws and many of its working committees. It appears that whenever the Kansas Judicial Council, the Kansas Bar Association, the American Bar Association, or any group needs true legal expertise, Jim is sought out to serve in their committees. In fact, it would surprise no one here today that his presence may have had something to do with Jim's recent call to serve on the Supreme Court Rules Advisory Committee. The awards Jim has received are too numerous to mention. Twice the Kansas Bar Association has bestowed upon him their President's Outstanding Service Award. In 2011, the University of Kansas Law School honored him with its Distinguished Alumni Award. And most notably, Jim has been a staunch defender of nonpartisan merit selection of judges and has made numerous public appearances before the legislature, civic groups, radio shows, panels, etc., as well as being the spokesperson for citizens to help to keep politics out of our courts. And Jim's battle will no doubt continue next session against renewed efforts to put politics back into our judicial selection process. One last story relating to Garden City needs to be told. In 1997, Jim was inducted into the Garden City High School Hall of Fame. Jim used his acceptance speech, as he would, to turn it into a teaching moment. He reminded us of how much we had learned from our teachers at Garden City High School, who not only challenged us to be successful, but also to have the audacity to take the risk and try. He presented the example of two young kids who had the audacity to think you could actually elect one of them to public office. Jim left the clear impression that our high school teachers had instilled in him the belief that if he wanted to become the leader of a great law school, then he had to accept the challenge and try. Jim and I both believe that the quality of our teachers was directly linked to the school board's conscious decision during the first half of the 60s to pay 50% more than other school districts to attract the best. Our teachers were truly exemplary. Many went on to teach at colleges and universities. One ended up heading a department that trained teachers how to teach gifted students. Another had a science building named after him. And then it suddenly became very clear to me that Washburn Law School's recognition by the National Jurist as the #1 school in the nation in student satisfaction with quality of faculty was directly attributable to Jim's unending quest as dean to procure the brightest and the best teachers to challenge his students. Finally, of course, this is not a eulogy. Jim has affected the lives and ambitions of thousands of aspiring lawyers. Jim will shortly tie the 40-year record of longest-serving law professor at Washburn. However, we know that he will continue to teach and inspire the minds of many students yet to enroll. And maybe a student or two or more yet to enter his classroom will leave it with the confidence that they too may succeed in life and perhaps even be so audacious as to believe that they too can one day have the opportunity to serve as a member of this distinguished court. I believe that we can all see before us at least 5 former students of Jim who accepted this challenge. Emerson defined a friend as one with whom I can be sincere. Before him, I may think aloud. Jim is certainly a person that has the concern and the sensitivity to be formed between him and those he honors with his friendship. His wit, his intellect, truly make him a person whom one enjoys thinking aloud with. He is a true friend to all present here today, a true friend of the court, and a true friend of justice. It is indeed an honor to have been asked with Professor Elrod to present our best friend, James M. Concannon, to the Supreme Court as a most worthy recipient of the Justice Award.
Thank you, Mr. Heineman. I now will invite Linda Elrod to provide a rebuttal to those remarks.
No rebuttal.
No rebuttal.
May it please the court and all the guests here. I too am honored to be invited to be part of this ceremony because I have known Jim not quite as long as David, who's known him 50 years, but I figured that I first met him in May of 1972 when Gus Schrader and Randy Harrell hired me as the first woman research assistant or research attorney in the Supreme Court pool there for the Kansas Judicial Council. And Jim, in his usual quick-witted and funny way, included me instantly in the activities of the research attorneys and going to lunch and doing things and made me feel part of it, which is part of his hallmark all the way through life, has been to make people feel welcome and warm. And so the part I'm going to cover is a little bit about him as teacher, dean, and as law reformer in going through. Both of us have a man named Dennis Stewart, and Ray Spring to thank for our positions. Dennis Stewart only taught at Washburn Law School for 2 years, but he left 2 legacies, I think, for the school. He left to take a federal magistrate position, and Ray Spring called me to teach creditors' rights in summer school that year, which is what ultimately resulted in me getting there. And Jim Concannon was invited to become a full-time professor to take his spot in the fall of 1973. And I've always felt that Jim was somewhat responsible for me being one of the 5 who was hired the next year. The others who were hired that year also became part of the fabric of the law school. It was Carl Monk, John Keither, and myself, Joel Meineke, who bounced back and forth for a while, and Randy Jones. That same decade, in 1979, we hired several other people, 7 of whom are still at the law school. We still have, Greg, Merle, Bill, John Christensen, Nancy Maxwell, Mike Kay, who came in that decade, that are still at the law school, which I think is remarkable in terms of time. Although Jim started as a Jayhawk, and we have to admit that, we can't ignore it. It's a reality, and it's a fact, and it's on the record. He quickly demonstrated that he could be an Ichabod, and that he would be a good Ichabod. He also demonstrated immediately that he was a born teacher. Within 3 years of joining the faculty, he received the William O. Douglas Outstanding Teacher Award. His classes were challenging. They were sought after. Some of the students who were in the legacy section may remember the 6-hour exams. And he would often have 3 pages of facts, and there were only 2 sentences that actually made any difference to the outcome of the decision. And so Paul Hofer tells me that he felt that the Concannon exams were what best prepared him to go out into the world and listen to people drone on in their first interviews and to be able to pick out what's relevant and what's not as you go through. Jim's door was always open and is still to this day to students and colleagues alike. Anybody can go bouncing into his office and ask a question, ask for help, and he is more than willing to give it. One former student commented, "He has been a tremendous source of information with a great sense of humor. He always has made learning the law interesting, challenging, and fun." One of the things I have most appreciated about Jim, however, is that he's a people person. He has always been a people person, and he has recognized that the way you keep people together is by people liking each other and wanting to be together and wanting to do things together. And he started this early on. I remember the old house on Mulvane, where he would have an annual Super Bowl party, and everybody would go to his Super Bowl party. Of course, most of you who know Jim know that he's a partier, and he went to any, and some would say all, student and faculty function parties also, because that also helped to increase the camaraderie among the student body and the faculty if we showed up at the student events, and I think it was an extremely important part of developing. The fact that 17 of the faculty who were there throughout Jim's term as dean of the law school came before 1980, I think is a hallmark to that collegiality. The fact that Jim was invited to give the eulogies when we lost 2 of our most beloved and valued colleagues, John Keither and Ray Spring, is a testament to the collegiality and how people feel about Jim. He served on the faculty recruitment committee for 20 years, and part of the reason for that is because he wanted to make sure who we got at that school were people who fit in and people who would be part of the fabric going forward into the future. He once said, "If we can't get a candidate to laugh spontaneously during the interview, we don't want them." And I always thought that was a fairly good criteria, that you've got to have somebody that has a sense of humor and doesn't take themselves too terribly seriously. In 1988, Jim became dean of the law school. He accepted the challenge, he stepped up, and he did it. His unparalleled enthusiasm for his new duties amazed me. He had never been an administrator, he wasn't the associate dean, he had never done that stuff, and he did it. and he wanted to do it, and he enjoyed doing it, and he was good at it. That's what I think surprised everybody, is how good he was at it. His first job, as David said, was the law school library edition. Now, for somebody who hasn't raised tons of money for a cause like a building, that was a formidable challenge. And what did he do? He started the Dean's Circle. He started showing up in law offices all across the state of Kansas and hosting receptions and alumni events at ABA functions. He was instrumental in helping with the Koch Scholars and getting this Koch Scholarship at Washburn. At one point, when he was dean, Washburn was the 8th highest law school in the nation in percentage of alumni donating to the law school. Think about that. For a little school in the Midwest, with all the other schools around, we had the 8th highest percentage of people donating money to the school. And that was because of his efforts and being out there beating the bushes and getting it done. And within 5 years, we had the $1 million and started and got the law school addition done. And our technology was probably the highlight of what ended up coming partly out of that. I remember there was one of the trade magazines that said, if you're stranded on a desert island and you have only one way into the internet, Wash Law is your portal. And I remember thinking, well, that's good advertisement. We like that one. So that was good. The statistics for their entering classes rose while he was dean, partly because he was able to get 3-year full scholarships for the top students. We are in a very competitive market at this point where everybody's throwing money at kids, and if you can only do it for 1 year, you're not going to get them because they want to know that they can go for more than that. He was able to do that and raise our number of applicants and our quality of the class. When we received the Princeton Review rating, which was wonderful, it was our student satisfaction report. Now, this doesn't count in U.S. News and World Report. This is the student satisfaction report. And I remember that Jim laughed and said, it's somewhat like receiving the Miss Congeniality Award at the Miss America pageant. And I thought, well, I think that's probably true. It is like the Miss Congeniality Award. But he considered that to be one of the most important, as did I, because that's the consumer. Those are your consumers, are your students. And if they're happy, then that's good. That's a positive thing, even if U.S. News doesn't quite get it. After stepping down from the faculty after 13 years, Jim came back up to the 3rd floor, took Ray Spring's office, and immediately fit back into the faculty. Not all deans can do that. Some deans are pains in the rear of everybody for a long time to come. He wasn't. He came back into the faculty and started work on a great book. If you haven't read it, I'm sure we can get copies and he will autograph them. It's called The Ideal Place for the Establishment of a Great Law School, 100-Year History of Washburn Law. He has provided a lasting memento that will take Washburn forever. No matter what happens, there is something in paper that documents the first 100-year history. How wonderful. What a gift to give the school. I can't imagine anything any better. As C.W. Guswell, you might remember him. He wrote my favorite book, A Paris Journal, but he wrote a column in the Kansas City Star about faculty member he had known, and he said, institutions are built by those dedicated faculty who provide the long experience and continuity of values, who perhaps came by chance but decided to stay, not because they had to, but because they wanted to make a contribution here. I say that's what happened with Jim Concannon at Washburn and how lucky Washburn was to have him and is to have him. Now, the reason we're here, and that's the law reformer public servant, and the main reason for this, Jim Concannon deserves this wonderful award because throughout his career, he has been what I would call a lawyer's law professor. Lawyers have always felt like they could call him and ask him questions. Judges have felt like they could ask him to put on presentations. Notice I didn't say anything about calling or anything. About presentations at judicial conferences. By 1976, he was already teaching district and appellate judges evidence rules, and he has done that forever. He's written over, 25 years of the chapter on evidence for the Kansas Bar Association. He's taught in the Judicial College in Reno. He's taught in various other states, teaching judges and lawyers how to do their jobs better. One of the reasons I think he and I got along so well is because that has also been my mission, to do those kinds of things, and he respected that you could go out and help make the practice of law better. It wasn't always about writing 350-page footnoted articles, that sometimes what you need to do is help those who are out there working it do what they do better. And that has always been Jim's position, is let's do what we do better. For over 30 years, he did bar reviews and roped many of us in the room into those, giving bar review lectures. And as David said, he received the KBA's President's Outstanding Award twice, which is amazing in and of itself, for all of his CLE and committee work that he's done over the year with them. I want to mention just one little aspect about the Uniform Law Commission, because I had the opportunity to be a reporter for the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act, which Kansas does have. Jim is on the Style Committee. The Style Committee is the most hated committee of all of the Uniform Law Commission. Why? Because they deal with whether you use the word which or that, whether you're using commas or semicolons, whether the language is put in legislative form that's appropriate or not, and from a reporter's point of view, they tinker with your work product. You have put out a work product and they change it. And they do, sometimes radically. Fortunately, he didn't change mine much, but fortunately. But that is a labor of love, because I have seen one of the papers that he marked up that looks like a Sam Peckinpah movie. I guess it would be Quentin Tarantino today, probably, I guess. But, just total cut, get this, that. Say it in the positive and affirmative, not the negative. Don't use passive, use active. All those things that you learn in research and writing and have forgotten over the years, he gets to use again. He also used them, though, when he came back and he was invited to serve on the Civil Code Committee for the Judicial Council, and he helped improve our civil code and make it more readable and more what it's supposed to be. He's also served on the Supreme Court Rules Advisory Committee, using his expertise in those. In addition to all this, he's a good citizen. He's always been a good citizen. He shows up. He goes to bar functions, he goes to law functions, he goes to alumni functions. He likes to go to functions. He is a function person. But he helped start the Sam Crow Inn of Court in 1992. He's been the administrator of it since then. He served as president of it for a couple of years. An additional mentoring opportunity that goes up and beyond just regular classroom teaching. He conducts site evaluations for the ABA and the AALS all over the country, and that, if you don't know what those are, every few years law schools come up for reevaluation, and they send out a team of deans, professors, clinicians, librarians to go and see if the school's doing what it's supposed to do. Jim has been on countless teams, perhaps 12, speaks very highly for what they think of his work product and being able to do those types of things. Much of his passion, however, and I think part of the reason for this award, and much of his passion and energy has been dedicated to the nonpartisan selection of judges. I don't know of anyone who has worked harder over the years to assure that judicial selection process in Kansas remains fair and focused on quality rather than politics. Jim Concannon, in my opinion, is the best gift that KU Law School ever gave to Washburn Law School, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Elrod, for your remarks. As I mentioned earlier, the Justice Award consists of two things, one of which is a plaque, and the second is a check for $500. I don't know about you, but I'm just a poor state employee, and a check for $500 represents a lot of money. I did not want the responsibility of holding on to such a large sum. So I thought, who is stalwart, who is steadfast, who is dependable, who's reliable, who is trustworthy, so that I can give them the check for $500. And when I call upon them today, they could come forward, give me the check, and I could give it to Professor Concannon. So at this time, I would call upon Dean Romig to come forward. You have the check, sir? The Dean of the Washburn Law School. You do not.
I do not, but I can find it for you.
You can find that.
If you can give me a clue.
Are we going to have to take up a collection?
You can do that.
All right. I'm just pulling his leg. Thank you, Dean. Professor Concannon, it's my great pleasure to present to you the 2012 award, the Justice Award from the Kansas Supreme Court, for all the reasons we've just heard from your friends and colleagues, and for your being such a great supporter of the merit selection system in Kansas. That's just one of the many things you've done for all the citizens of Kansas. What we shall do at this time is the court will step down in front of the bench, and we would ask you to start at one end and go through the receiving line so each of us gets a chance to shake your hand and thank you personally for all you have done. I will be the last person in line. I will be the one holding the check. And that will be your incentive, sir, to shake the hands of all my colleagues. And after you and I are done shaking hands, I will present you with the plaque and the check if that's agreeable to you. Very good. I'd like to take a moment and the liberty of reading the plaque. The Kansas Supreme Court Justice Award 2012, presented to Professor James M. Concannon for distinguished contributions to the improvement of justice in Kansas, signed by all 7 justices. And thank you, Dean Romig, the check for $500. I think some applause would be appropriate. Professor, we eagerly await your remarks.
May it please the Court, Chief Justice Nuss, Justices, distinguished guests, members of my Washburn Law School family, past and present, and good friends. I thank the members of the Supreme Court for the honor of receiving the Justice Award. It is especially gratifying to receive it from a court on which 5 of my former students serve. It may be even more gratifying in light of that fact that it doesn't appear that there will be a published dissent. I was quite stunned when I opened Chief Justice Nuss's letter informing me of my selection for this award. The letter listed the past recipients, and that list includes many giants of our profession and personal heroes. 3 in particular have had a direct link to my career. The 1991 recipient was Judge Spencer Gard. And 60 years ago, he was chair of the drafting committee of the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws, which drafted the Uniform Rules of Evidence. A decade later, Judge Gard made sure when he chaired the Judicial Council Committee preparing the new Kansas Code of Civil Procedure of 1964, that code included the Uniform Rules of Evidence. And I have taught those rules and compared them to the federal rules of evidence now for 40 years. Professor Paul Wilson, a 1992 recipient, taught the Uniform Rules of Evidence when I was a student in his evidence class at KU, and the Kansas rules were being used as the starting point by the committee that drafted the federal rules. The most recent recipient of the Justice Award, Gerald Goodell, served for 20 years as president of the Washburn Law School Foundation, to which I have designated the cash portion of the Justice Award. Jerry was a valued confidant to me as dean and advisor, as well as to my predecessor, Carl Monk. Jerry, our thoughts are with you at this sad time for you and your family, and I'm especially honored that you would come today. I'm blessed with many long-term friends. I want to thank my friend of 50 years, Dave Heineman, and my friend and colleague of 40 years, Linda Elrod, for their wonderful, if overly generous, remarks. And also for their discretion with some stories that they could have but happily have not shared. I have never wanted to attend my own funeral, and now it really seems that no purpose would be served by my doing so. I've also been fortunate to have the support of family who have their own connections to this court. My spouse and partner, Melissa Masoner, served as permanency planning coordinator for the court from 1990 to 1992, working to double the number of court-appointed special advocate programs statewide from 8 to 16, and coordinating a statewide study and implementation plan on enhancing the representation of children in Kansas courts. Melissa relishes telling the story about the time Chief Justice Miller announced in amazement to all who could hear that she was the first Rotarian he had ever kissed. Melissa's father, Jim Porter, was a proud member of the bar of this court for 69 years. Chris and Michelle have been members of the Kansas bar since 1997. They both attended out-of-state law schools and have never denied that it was my bar review lecture on evidence that brought them together like survivors of a common disaster. Today's event is a reminder of the serendipity that can shape a career. In my case, it started before David Heineman's serendipitous hallway conversation with Ray Spring. I started work as a law clerk in the Attorney General's office right after my second year of law school. The Attorney General, Kent Frizzell, was running for governor, and Assistant Attorney General Dick Seaton was the Republican candidate to replace him. And with all of them being gone, I received more assignments than clerks often did at the time. You can imagine the pride of a 3L in being de facto counsel to the State Board of Cosmetology. which in those days seemed constantly to have new legal problems. Soon it became settled that I would stay on after graduation as an assistant attorney general. It never occurred to anyone in that office that there was the remotest chance that a consummate lawyer like Dick Seaton could possibly lose the election to someone who had never practiced law. But with the disdain for logic that it sometimes exhibits, the electorate had another idea. And soon I was copying down the few job listings on the placement board at Green Hall. I typed up and sent out a resume on legal-size paper. Law schools at the time didn't have full-time placement directors to advise us on such matters. And I actually had a few interviews. Happily, though, Dick Foth, who was the chief of the Attorney General's Civil Division, learned that he would succeed Earl Hatcher on May the 1st as one of the 2 commissioners of the Kansas Supreme Court. And he offered me a position after graduation as a research attorney. I quickly called off my search in private practice. The problem, as it turned out, was that Commissioner Foth didn't get to hire a research attorney. The only reason the commissioners had one was because Chief Justice Price didn't use a research attorney and allowed the commissioners to hire one instead. Well, when Justice Price decided to retire as of September 1st, the position I was going to fill was gone. And so it was Commissioner Foth who checked with the justices, passed my legal-sized resume on to Justice Alex Fromme, who had not yet hired a new research attorney. I will always be grateful for the opportunity I had to learn from such a remarkable justice and human being as Justice Fromme. There was more serendipity to come. As Dave mentioned, I decided I would leave Justice Fromme after a year and a half to become an assistant county attorney in Lawrence when Ed Collister was elected to that office and would also join the private firm Ed was starting, which the county attorney was able to do at that time. Ed had been the chief of the criminal division in the Attorney General's office. You, of course, know what's coming. It never occurred to me that there was the remotest chance that a consummate lawyer like Ed Collister could possibly lose that election. Once again, the electorate had a different idea and tilted my career path again. Fortunately, Justice Fromme was wiser than the electorate about the electorate than I was, and he hadn't yet hired my replacement. But I figured out that law teaching, or just about anything, had better job security than politics. And my resume, therefore, was on Dean Spring's desk when he learned that Dennis Stewart, who had taught evidence, would be leaving at the end of that academic year. And I was invited to interview. In fact, Judge Crystal Marquardt was a member of the student interview committee that I met with. There was serendipity even then. The university at the time was siphoning off a significant amount of the revenue the law school produced, making it difficult for the law school to compete in the national hiring market the way we do today. While I would like to think that the risk the school took in hiring me worked out okay, I'm also pleased that for many years now we have not had to take the risk of hiring new faculty members at a comparable stage of their professional careers. And I'm proud of the faculty succession planning we have done, reflected in my newer faculty colleagues, many of whom are here today. In reflecting on my various involvements with judicial council and court committees, a phrase came to mind that was used by a former Chief Justice of this court, Rousseau Birch, who became the dean at Washburn in February 1937 at age 73, ironically after having been defeated for re-election by Washburn's dean, Harry K. Allen. Birch was forced to retire after a car accident in the summer of 1938, and at that time he wrote that his association with Washburn law students was one of the most gratifying of what he described as my varied enthusiasms. Well, my involvement with the courts has been a similar enthusiasm for me. In major part because of the leadership of able chairs like Judge David Knudson, then Judge Steve Hill, now Judge Mike Ward on the Pattern Instructions Committees, Rich Hayes, another refugee from that Attorney General's office, and now Gloria Flingy on the Judicial Performance Commission, Carol Green on the Supreme Court Rules Advisory Committee, and Nick Badgerow on the Judicial Council's Civil Code Committee. Which gave me the opportunity to serve with my former civil procedure professor at KU, Bob Cassad, and also to work with my former student Nancy Strauss, the executive director of the Judicial Council. I doubt Nancy ever imagined when she graduated from law school that we would or could spend so much time on those last two committees that I mentioned, changing shall to must and which to that and vice versa, getting rid of the passive voice and generally trying to make statutes and rules say what they mean. It also has been a special privilege to serve on the Uniform Law Commission with legendary lawyers like Dick Height, Glee Smith, John Hayes, and Paul Wilbert, who already were icons of the bar when I became a lawyer, and more recently, Senator Tim Owens and others. Since I taught my first class, 6,404 students have graduated from Washburn Law School, including the 30 who will graduate this evening. Of course, not all of them had classes with me. When I was dean, I often only taught half of the entering students. But a high percentage of those graduates have been exposed to my supplemental rules of procedure and evidence. Commandments like, if a statute is involved, don't think great thoughts, read the statute. Or its corollary. When a statute or rule is ambiguous, it is mandatory to think great thoughts. Or my emerging favorite for the millennial generation, when a statute or rule is involved, it is mandatory to read all the way to the period. One of the great joys of this profession is the opportunity that it provides to work with former students on judicial council and bar association committees, at CLEs, with the Kansas Inns of Court, and to follow the success of their careers as judges, practitioners, and in-house counsel, and serving our state and nation in so many important ways. Dave and Cricket both mentioned my long involvement in the issue of judicial selection. It is vital that our judges be selected and retained in a way that assures they are highly capable, in a way that enables them to perform their critical role in our system of separation of powers, upholding the rule of law even when doing so goes against the popular will of the moment. In my view, the merit selection method achieves those goals to a far greater extent than any other method. And it is disheartening to see the growing effort by those, sadly including some lawyers, who seek to undermine judicial independence and make the process of selecting our appellate judges far more partisan. However, the consistent and overwhelming votes in favor of merit selection when that issue has been on the ballot in Shawnee, Johnson, Lyon, Chase, Leavenworth, and Atchison counties demonstrate that the public can be educated on this issue. Those of us who understand firsthand how important merit selection is to the quality of justice in Kansas must be prepared to do just that. Once again, I thank the court for this award. It is a special day for me. I thank all of you for being here today, and I'm honored to have you share this special day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Concannon. I am now going to direct our appellate reporter, Richard Ross, to publish today's proceedings in the Kansas Reports. And we will now adjourn to a reception in the atrium, or as Justice Rosen refers to it as the Hall of Justice. I'm going to invite each and every one of you to please attend, visit personally with Professor Concannon, and express to him your warmest personal congratulations. We thank each of you for attending this special ceremony. At this time, these proceedings are adjourned. Thank you.